All right, good morning. So my name is Patrick Sylvester. I'm the business manager here at the USC Foundation. I worked as an engineer here as well years ago, but now I handle the business aspects of stuff. Today we're going to be talking about your cross-connection control regulations. I'm going to begin by talking about the elements of a program. This is going to be a very abbreviated version of something we would normally do in our specialist course. We talk about the different elements we'd like to see in a cross-connection control program. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about federal regulations, the regulations that basically allow the states, require the states to set up their own cross-connection control regulations. Then we're going to spend some time talking about the various states represented in the audience today, which is California, Louisiana, Montana, New Mexico, Utah, and Virginia. So when we talk about a cross-connection control program, from the Foundation's point of view, what we would like to see is 5 major elements in any cross-connection control program. Authority, backflow preventers, certified testers and specialists, defensible and detailed records, education and training. Easy to remember, A, B, C, D, E. Those are just the elements we want to see. When we go over the state regulations, we're going to look at the state regulations and see how they compare with the elements we would like to see. Does the state require the local water supplier to have authority or some legal regulations or ordinance in place? What are the requirements for backflow preventers? What's required for testers? Are records necessary to be kept? Is there a public education program or training for staff or whatever? So we'll talk about the different regulations in light of these elements of a program. So first of all, authority. Obviously, it's important for any cross-connection control program to have some sort of authority. If you go to a customer and say, hey, you need to put in a backflow preventer, and the customer says, but I don't want to, and you have no authority, you can't do anything about it, other than maybe try to convince them that it's really important. So obviously it's nice if you have some sort of legal authority to carry out your program. So in order to have authority, we want to sort of trace how authority works. We look at the federal regulations that are in place, the state regulations, and then you would come down to some sort of local ordinance or codes that you're dealing with locally. But we're going to concentrate today on the state regulations. But I will talk about the federal regulations just for a bit. Now, there are a ton of regulations, federal regulations that are out there that affect drinking water. There's the Safe Drinking Water Act, there's the Total Coliform Rule, Lead and Copper Rule, Disinfection Byproducts Rule, Surface Water Treatment Rule, Groundwater Rule, and this rule and that rule and other rules. There's a bunch more rules out there that are in the Federal Register that sort of govern drinking water. We're going to concentrate on the Safe Drinking Water Act, as that has more to do with distribution. So this was passed in 1974. It was actually proposed by President Nixon. I didn't know that. I just found that out a couple weeks ago. And then it was passed by Congress after he left office. And the idea was to protect the public health by regulating the nation's public drinking water supply. So there were amendments after 1974. There were amendments in 86 and then again in 96. One thing that you'll find from the Safe Drinking Water Act is that it is often misquoted, misstated, misinterpreted, misrepresented. You'll find people say the Safe Drinking Water Act requires a water supplier to have a cross-connection control program. It doesn't say that. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires backflow preventers to be installed, field tested, and maintained annually. It doesn't say that. And I know some of you have information out there that says the federal law requires, federal and state regulations require backflow preventers to be installed and tested annually. That's not true because the federal regulations don't cover cross-connection control directly. They do cover it, but it's not a direct saying you have to have a cross-connection control program. What the law talks about is the maximum contaminant level allowed in any water supply. And it governs just a ton of different items, elements, compounds that you can only have a certain amount in your water supply in order for it to meet that the level of purity. So there's a maximum contaminant level. So most water, as you work in the water industry, you know water is going to have stuff in it. You see, you do tests, you find out there's something in the water. There may be some lead in the water, but it's not enough to really affect humans. But we're looking at what is the maximum contaminant level. Those are all set by the EPA. So that is federal law. Drinking water has a maximum contaminant level for all sorts of items. So the maximum contaminant level of a contaminant in water which is delivered to the free-flowing outlet of the ultimate user of a public water system. It was a definition of the maximum contaminant level. The problem is that the purveyors were responsible in this original law that came out in 1974, were responsible to the free-flowing outlet of the ultimate water user's water system. Well, how can they be responsible for that? Because once the water supplier delivers the water to the customer, they really have no control over what happens to the water at that point in time. So the water purveyors were responsible for something that they had no control over. So there were amendments that came into place in December of 75